Good evening. Thank you for joining us today. As has been said, this will be our fourth presentation. We're picking up a continuation, really, of what was just covered in our last one. We talked about the good Kellogg. For anyone who's maybe catching this as the first presentation, we've looked at the rebellion of Lucifer. We've looked at the work of Christ in his incarnation. And then we jump down to Dr. Kellogg, who for a time understood and applied the principles that Jesus used in his ministry on earth and was intended of God to accomplish truly great things, some of which were accomplished and some of which were not, because Dr. Kellogg eventually failed and he turned from the Lord. And that's the time frame we're going to look at now, is what happened when Dr. Kellogg fell under the influence of Satan. So let's begin with a word of prayer. Father, we tremble at the thought that we too are weak and frail and prone to evil, and that it would be no stretch of the imagination for us to fall by the wayside. So we seek today to learn lessons that will assist us, to learn lessons that will enable us to assist others. May we be kept from the fate that Dr. Kellogg eventually suffered. We pray that you will guide us now and bless our time. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. This is an incredibly sad story in regard to Dr. Kellogg in his later years of relationship to the church. It's a story that needn't have come about the way that it did. It is just sad. And let's see. One thing that we looked at yesterday was that in 1892, Ellen White said that the loud cry had begun, and we put that in relationship to the beginning of the work to manifest, to reveal the character of God through the same means, the union of Christ-like work for the body and Christ-like work for the soul, which Jesus used and which Ellen White declared to be the true interpretation of the gospel. Unfortunately, it didn't continue that way. And by 1899, that's only 7 years later, Ellen White would write, "The third angel's message, in the place of swelling into a loud cry, is being smothered." That manuscript, the title of that manuscript is The Medical Missionary Work. And it was in relation to the medical missionary work and its distortion by that time that she wrote that the third angel's message, instead of swelling into a loud cry, is being smothered. What had happened was twofold. First, the medical missionary work suffered at the hands of those who opposed Dr. Kellogg for a variety of reasons. They did not cooperate with God's plan and God's intention to use Dr. Kellogg in a powerful way. And eventually that irritated the doctor and he retaliated. And that should not have been. So there's plenty of fault to go around on all sides. By this time, 1899, Kellogg was essentially seeking to outdo all the ministers. He was annoyed with them. He said, "I'll just do more than you will. You just get out of my way." And yet he had largely turned from the missionary aspect, and he was kind of doing what we might now refer to as a social gospel type of approach, or a Christian humanitarianism. He still loved to help people, but he confined his help to the temporal, health and well-being, food, clothes, the things of this earth. It had started earlier, as I mentioned. I have light from the Lord that Dr. Kellogg needs to be guarded. He is leaving a wrong impression on minds. He has made a mistake in supposing medical missionary work has an importance above every other work. Medical mission work has its place, but it has been made disproportionately important. It didn't have to be that way. Had Dr. Kellogg's brethren stood with him in the first of his experience in connection with health reform, the present condition of things would not now exist. And that's the sad part of the story, is that this was an entirely preventable circumstance that was allowed to develop when it did not need to be. In 1900, opposition to Kellogg's work continued. It still continued, even after he had gone the wrong direction. Those who were opposing him still gave him trouble. And increasingly, this gave the devil opportunity to continue tempting Kellogg to impatience and to pride. And the Lord continued to send him warnings. Ellen White, I think clearly and easily, and her son Willie would agree with me, Ellen White put more time and effort into seeking to save Dr. Kellogg than she did in anyone else. Willie, actually, writing a letter to a friend, said that he was quite certain that his mother would put more effort into saving Dr. Kellogg than any other man, including her two sons, which is saying something. And he went on to say, and why is that? He said, as mother has told me several times in the last year, Dr. Kellogg now stands where he can do more to help the situation for the church than any other man. And he can do more to hurt the situation of the church than any other man. He was important. But yeah, that didn't work out that well. The Lord has sent you warnings, but you have not heeded them. This is to Dr. Kellogg. The deceptive power of the enemy has led you to leave God's banner trailing in the dust, while Dr. Kellogg has committed himself as working undenominationally in a work which has taken the money from a people who are decidedly a denominational people. Since Kellogg found it so hard, and it was hard because others made it hard, to work with the church in the ministry, he put less and less effort into the evangelistic aspect. Why would he want to? Why would he feel like bringing people under the influence of the ministers who opposed him? So that's the dilemma he found himself in. He wanted to help people, and he still thought of himself as a Christian. But these other men, these ministers that he had come to despise by this time, were making his work so difficult. Why would he want to convert someone and then put them into their hands? You see, and so that was a challenge. He spent more and more time and more money helping people with their health, just their physical health. This made him feel good, right? Because it's more blessed to give than to receive. He enjoyed it, but it wasn't blessing people beyond the physical level. And it was not the whole of the work that God intended him to do. Ellen White going on, she says, the work has been hindered. The cause of God should have a different showing, far different. And who is to blame for this hindrance? You, Dr. Kellogg, give heed to men not of our faith. You delight to show what you have done, and by a free use of money that was not yours to handle, in a way that God has not appointed. This was actually a real problem, because Dr. Kellogg was a very, very effective fundraiser. And he would go to camp meetings or just continue his correspondence with church members. And a lot of money came into the sanitarium. And the other big project of Kellogg's interest at the time was the Chicago City Mission. At its height, the Chicago City Mission, they were providing food and clothing and shelter for 400 people every night, 400 people, and every day, food, clothes, as needed. And that takes a lot of money. And it was to the point that the mission work of the church was being hindered around the world for lack of funds. Ellen White was in Australia, of course, during this time, and the whole 9 years that she was over there, they were scrimped, cheated out of the funds that they should have had. Well, so many more aspects of this that I could go into, but hopefully that's enough. We're going to jump over a lot of things and come down to 1902. And on the 18th of February, 1902, the sanitarium burned to the ground. A number of amazing stories. They managed to evacuate all the patients. No one was left abandoned in the sanitarium. There was only one fatality. That was a Mr. Case, an elderly gentleman who was safely evacuated, and he was across the street from the sanitarium, standing in the snowbanks and the snowdrifts in McCamley Park, when all of a sudden, those around him heard him exclaim, "My mattress!" And he went running back into the building to try and retrieve his mattress. Now, that may sound ridiculous, but you have to understand that in that era, it was not uncommon for people to keep their life savings hidden in their mattress. And this is where Mr. Case had accumulated his competency. We saw that word yesterday. This was his retirement fund. It was meant to provide all his needs for the rest of his life. And I guess the good news is that it provided all his needs for the rest of his life, because his life was very short at that point. But he was the only fatality. Well, now the question is, what do we do? The sanitarium is burned to the ground. Do we rebuild it? Now, Ellen White had already strongly suggested to Kellogg that it would have been better for the large sanitarium. By that time, they had a maximum capacity of about 1,000 patients. They didn't usually run at complete capacity, but there were about 1,000 beds in the sanitarium. And Ellen White had often suggested to Kellogg that it would have been better to take that one large institution and split it into about 10 different institutions and scatter them around the country or around the world. Well, the sanitarium, having burnt to the ground, provided a great opportunity to do that. But Dr. Kellogg was not going to do that. He didn't say that. He didn't obstinately say, no, I'm not going to do it. He just quietly didn't do that. Let's put it that way. He actually made it look like, I don't know, maybe I should do this. Maybe I should go somewhere else. And by playing hard to get in that way, he actually, the state of Michigan and the city of Battle Creek both gave him some very helpful tax breaks to rebuild there, because they wanted the business back, right? Well, okay, so Kellogg wants to rebuild the building. He drew up some plans, which were somewhat deceptive, and were changed. He got the plans approved by the General Conference and then proceeded to make them bigger, better, fancier, and obviously more expensive. So one of the problems he was running into was he needed money, and he came up with a plan. He said, I have a book. I've just written a book. Now, Dr. Kellogg wrote 50 books, maybe 52 or something like that, whatever the number is exactly, but more than 50 books, at least 50 books in his lifetime. And he was a very gifted author. And he said, I have just recently written a book. Let's take this book. He said, I will dedicate my author's royalties. Let's ask the Review and Herald to print it at cost. And we will ask the church members to sell it without taking their sales fee, whatever, out of it. And let's have all the profits go to rebuild the sanitarium. Well, that seemed like a great idea. Actually, the General Conference said it was a grand idea, a grand suggestion. Unfortunately, Kellogg was not being honest. Um, and just as he had misrepresented the plans for the rebuilding of the sanitarium, he also played um, played like he was dumb and innocent, let's put it that way, about this book. Of course, the book you can probably read there unless you have a very small screen. The book is The Living Temple. And it was a book on health and physiology. Much of it, I understand. I've never read the book, which will be. I'll explain that in a moment. But much of the content was on health and physiology and health practices, and it was all very good. But it included concepts of pantheism. This is the belief that God is in everything, from rocks to air to bunny rabbits and dolphins and mosquitoes and people. Of course, from those in the audience from India will be well aware of the idea of pantheism. It's an integral part of Hinduism. But it has become a much more common element in quote unquote Western society, America, Canada, Europe. It's been modernized and adapted somewhat in a way that's probably pretty much untrue to the original concepts from Hinduism, but it's the idea of pantheism is now a loosely defined spiritual idea, right? It's no better now than it was before. Much of its popularity is due to the idea that everyone is God. I mean, if God is everything and everywhere, then I'm God too, right? And if I am God, I certainly don't need to listen to anyone else telling me what to do, right? I'm God, right? I can think for myself. Thank you very much. I become the final authority and I can do whatever I want. Well, there were elements of that. Now, I believe it was a fairly weak presentation of pantheism. As I said, I've never read the book, but I have read about, what is it, 4 paragraphs or something that different ones have included in their histories of the era. And I guess I would have to say that if those 4 paragraphs or 5 or whatever it is are the worst pantheism from the book, it's very mild. I'm sure I could find worse examples of pantheism just by going to a health food store in the United States or Canada here and just looking at the materials on their shelf in a health food store. So it was not a very strong example of pantheism, but it was definitely pantheistic. And Kellogg tried to play dumb. He said, well, I don't know. It just seems right to me, and he says, well, I'll revise it. If you have a problem, I'll revise it. And so he revised a little here, a little there, but he left the core thought alone. And so it ended up becoming quite a controversy. In the midst of all that, to me, the most remarkable aspect of this whole story is Ellen White's determined efforts to save Dr. Kellogg. I already mentioned that she saw him as the most important individual at that time for either helping or hurting the work of God. And she put more time and effort into it than just about anything else during that era. At the General Conference session of 1903, now this is more than a year after he'd written Living Temple, right? She made what I think is probably her strongest public effort to defend Dr. Kellogg. I mean, this guy's a pantheist, right? He'd written a pantheistic book a year before, and she's still trying to defend him, not pantheism. That idea never came up in the discussion. She's not defending pantheism, but she's still defending Dr. Kellogg. And this is in a public meeting at the General Conference session. I find this quite remarkable, actually. She wrote, God does not endorse the efforts put forth by different ones to make the work of Dr. Kellogg as hard as possible in order to build themselves up. God gave the light on health reform, and those who rejected it rejected God. One and another who knew better said, it all came from Dr. Kellogg, and they made war upon him. This had a bad influence on the doctor. He put on the coat of irritation and retaliation. God did not want him to stand in a position of warfare, and he does not want you to stand there. I find this utterly remarkable. There's more, of course, to this passage, but we won't go reading that. To be so clearly and so frankly addressing the congregation, which was, of course, the General Conference session, very largely the ministry. Yeah, I find it quite amazing. Well, at that time, like I said, at the General Conference session that year in 1903, there was no mention of pantheism. That was not the time to deal with it. Some months later, the Lord made it clear that it was time to deal with that. And so Ellen White dealt with that issue at that time. One of the terms or the phrasings that she used to describe this, she spoke of the alpha and the omega of apostasy, or the alpha and omega of heresy. You're probably familiar with this. Jesus called himself the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. That's really quite simple, because the Alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet, and the Omega is the last letter. So for us in English, we would say from A to Z, basically. This Alpha Omega imagery was used by the Lord to give us a warning of an apostasy, similar to that of the early 1900s that we may expect in the last days. That's the thing. The Alpha, we will see, was in Kellogg's day. The Omega is yet to come. Living Temple contains the Alpha of these theories. I knew that the Omega would fall in a little while, and I trembled for our people. That statement right there is where I took the title for my third book, Tremble, which deals with Kellogg and the Alpha and the Omega in depth. Well, she wrote again. She says, in the book Living Temple, there is presented the Alpha of deadly heresies. The Omega will follow and will be received by those who are not willing to heed the warning God has given. Now, this is really interesting because in the context there, she does not specify what particular warning that might be. Is this the warning about pantheism? Is this the warning about rejecting medical missionary work? Is this the warning about rejecting the missionary aspect of medical missionary work? Well, I think it's probably all of those, to be honest. But if I were going to have to pick a single thing, it would probably be her emphasis to don't read the book. That's the one warning that's in closest context most times to her comments about Living Temple itself. So she said, don't read the book, which is why I mentioned, I haven't read the book. I don't intend to read the book. Ellen White saw that as a very bad thing to do. Let's just go on here. As I am shown these special things of Satan's science and how he deceived the holy angels. This is why we started with Lucifer in heaven, right? I am afraid of the men who have entered into the study of the science that Satan carried into the warfare in heaven. Oh, how I have longed to be where I should not be compelled to see the same science practiced on this earth by medical practitioners. Now, bear in mind, you don't have to be a doctor to get caught up into pantheism or the Alpha or the Omega, but this is a reference to Kellogg. And she was very clear, don't read the book. Be cautious in regard to what you read and how you hear. Take not a particle of interest in spiritualistic theories. Satan is waiting to steal a march upon everyone who allows himself to be deceived by his hypnotism. He begins to exert his power over them just as soon as they begin to investigate his theories. Another one, suffer not yourselves to open the lids of a book that is questionable. There is a hellish fascination in the literature of Satan. It is the powerful battery by which he tears down a simple religious faith. Never feel that you are strong enough to read infidel books, for they contain a poison like that of asps. They can do you no good and will assuredly do you harm. In reading them, you are inhaling the miasmas of hell. Well, that's a pretty strong warning. And if we fail to heed the warning that God has given, I suppose, as she said, we will end up accepting the omega of apostasy. Now, I don't for a moment think that that warning applies only to the book Living Temple. There are plenty of other sources that are as bad or worse, and plenty of other media. It's not just books. Today we could say, don't watch the crazy video, don't listen to the recording, don't, all those things. Stay away from that stuff. That's just very simple, straightforward, shouldn't be complicated, to understand type of a warning. But there is a unique means by which that warning is challenged. And that's in the world of academia. The whole concept, the whole structure of higher education is built on the idea that if we can only gather enough data and analyze it well enough, we can understand anything. And the idea that here is a body of data that you cannot deal with, that is anathema to the highly educated world. I will warn you that if I had to bet on the highly educated or God having the proper understanding of this issue, I will go with God. Human pride wants to master every challenge. I think there is demonic power to fear is absolute heresy within the world of higher academics. So be cautious. Don't read the book. Don't watch the videos. Don't expose yourself to a book or material that is questionable. Well, let's go on. Writing to Dr. Kellogg, who said, this whole matter has been presented to me. You have worked as Lucifer worked in the heavenly courts to persuade his associates to unite with him. The enemy has used his arts upon your mind, your boasted study of science and your assertion that you had obtained something excellent have deceived the men connected with you, and they have refused to listen to the warnings sent to keep them from listening to your false representations. So she's talking here basically about all the doctors in the sanitarium that he worked with. She had a great concern for these doctors because often many of them were, they were being influenced by Kellogg. They were not listening to the warnings sent to keep them. Okay. Well, let's go on. So we're in a battle. The first presentation was the core of the war. We're in a battle. And I don't think that can be overemphasized. We looked at this statement very early on. It says, God calls for far more tact, more wise generalship than has yet been given him by his human agents. There is need of sharp, sanctified thinking and keen work to counteract the ingenious plans of Satan. We've got our work cut out for us. And I am fearful for anyone who does not sense the magnitude of the challenge that is coming to God's church. Sometimes when I deal with this sort of a topic, I try to go into more detail as to how Dr. Kellogg copied the work of Lucifer in Heaven. That's really one of the core concepts of my last book called Tactics, right? The tactics that Dr. Kellogg, the tactics that Lucifer used, and the tactics that Christ used. So this series of presentations is largely based off of that book. And so there's a lot of details there that not going to go into this time. It is interesting to look at the tactics that he used, but for this presentation, I just want to focus on one key time period, one key issue. I'm just going to kind of tell the story, and actually, I don't usually like to just read material to an audience, but I'm just going to give us an excerpt out of my book Tactics to tell this particular part of the story. So here we are. I want you to see the nature of the battle as it was fought in the Alpha, because that will give us an understanding of the Omega and how we need far more tact and keen sanctified logic. In late August 1903, the doctor dictated a letter to his longtime friend and co-worker, Dr. David Paulson. Dr. Paulson is one of these doctors who was not listening to the warnings to, keep him from Kellogg. Now, one of the amazing things is that Paulson was saved through the work of Ellen White. Paulson was saved, and that's a huge blessing. He did years of great work afterwards. But at this time, Paulson was wrapped around Kellogg's little finger. Kellogg was clearly feeling that his decision to reopen Battle Creek College against Ellen White's counsel was going to precipitate a rupture between the medical work and the General Conference. This letter has a distinctly militant tone, making it a fascinating read. Unfortunately, it runs to 9 typewritten pages, so all we can include here are the barest of selections. Now, I just have to explain very briefly. Of course, Battle Creek College was in Battle Creek, and Battle Creek Sanitarium was in Battle Creek, and that worked out really, really well for Kellogg for many years, because all these college students made good workers at the sanitarium. And because they were good Adventists and sacrificially motivated, he didn't have to pay them much. And so he got a lot of cheap labor out of these college students. Well, the college, partly because of the problems, the influence that Kellogg was exerting in Battle Creek, in 1901, the college had moved from Battle Creek to Berrien Springs. I think it's, 120 kilometers away or something like that. I'm not sure exactly. And so the college students weren't there. And this was hard on Kellogg and the sanitarium financially. And so in late August 1903, Doctor was thinking of, let's reopen the college in Battle Creek. The other college was, at that time, was known as Emmanuel Missionary College. So they still had the charter, the legal document that allowed them to run a college in Battle Creek. So he said, we've got the charter. Let's just reopen the college. Ellen White said, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. We moved the college out of there to protect the students from the influences of Dr. Kellogg and of the circumstances in Battle Creek. So Kellogg knew that he was going directly against Ellen White's counsel, and he was quite certain it was going to, as I said there, precipitate a rupture. Things were going to get very tense. So he's writing to Dr. Paulson, and this is what he says. We are getting into strange times. It looks as though a line of battle is being formed. The conference men are determined to run the sanitarium and the medical missionary work. That was Kellogg's great fear. Because some ministers had opposed his work and tried to control it, he was determined that was never going to happen. So that was his great fear. The devil will tempt some of our doctors who are ambitious for place and professional opportunities to join hands with these conference men. I understood you over the telephone that you had crossed the Rubicon. I think Jones and Wagner have done the same, and McGann and Sutherland. Okay, now, just in case anybody does not understand that expression, to cross the Rubicon is an expression drawn from the history of Rome. During the Roman Republic, they had, the senators and all that sort of thing trying to rule the Republic. And then they had armies. And it was kind of like each army was under a particular general. And the generals would sometimes come back to Rome, but the Senate got to got feeling a little defensive about that. And so they passed a law that said when a general comes back to Rome, he leaves his army on the other side of the Rubicon River. They didn't want a military coup. Okay. So the general can come back, that's fine, but the army stays on the other side of the Rubicon. And so that worked that way for a long while. And then Julius Caesar took his army and crossed the Rubicon. And that means a decisive break. I'm now declaring my opposition. And of course, he destroyed in time, destroyed the Roman Republic and initiated the Roman Empire with himself as the emperor, of course. So what Kellogg's saying here is to Paulson and saying about Jones and Wagner and McGann and Sutherland, he says, you've all broken from the conference and you've taken your stand now. There's no turning back. He says, we have a truth which appeals to men and women more powerfully than any prophetic argument or any of the old doctrines which have so long been taught. These newer truths which have come to us have more converting power in them than all the doctrines which have been preached during the last 40 years put together. The living temple gospel renders useless a whole lot of their old flint muskets and their stale ammunition. Now, that reference there to 40 years, he was writing this in 1903. If you go back 40 years, it's 1863. That's when the Seventh-day Adventist Church was first legally formed. So he says, our doctrines are of more value than anything the church has done in the last 40 years. Multitudes of heathen believe in an ever-present God, in God working in the living things about us. The eyes of Christians have been blinded to this fact by false philosophy. And this is far more pernicious and injurious as to consequences than Sunday keeping or belief in the immortality of the soul. So, okay, so he's saying his pantheism is of more value and more significance than, the Sabbath or understanding the state of the dead. He says, I hope you will have a good time in Illinois and in Kansas. The principal thing is to get acquainted with a lot of young people. Do not forget to get the names of all the young people. A good way to get hold of the names is to tell them that we have some interesting literature we want to send them. Try to get some plan organized for selling Living Temple. Well, boy, that sounds kind of devious, right? He's going after the young people. He needs those cheap workers. Well, the combined protests of Ellen White and the denominational leaders managed to temporarily block Kellogg's plan for the college in 1903. But by 1905, Kellogg was desperate for student workers in the sanitarium. He began advertising the establishment of the Battle Creek Schools, a grandiose university to operate in conjunction with the sanitarium. The sales pitch indicated that students could choose from professional, scientific, literary, biblical, technical, industrial, 40 courses leading to diplomas and degrees. And of course, they could pay their expenses by working in the sanitarium. In many ways, it was a great opportunity for a young man or woman, provided one was willing to ignore Ellen White's counsel to avoid the faith-destroying influences then so prevalent at the sanitarium and Battle Creek in general. It was a straightforward contest. Kellogg was trying to get Adventist youth to Battle Creek, and Ellen White was warning them to stay away. And that's why Kellogg needed to discredit Ellen White. But how do you discredit the spirit of prophecy? Well, you have to attack its source of credibility. That would be God and the whole concept of inspiration. That's what gave Ellen White credibility and influence with church members. If he could cut inspiration out of the picture, she would just be another old woman. Had her opinions. As far as authority goes, wouldn't matter that much. But no, Kellogg wasn't stupid. He realized that was going too far. No one with any personal experience of Ellen White would believe that she wasn't inspired. Kellogg needed to dial it back a bit. But how? Simple. Just say that sometimes her ideas came from God And sometimes she was influenced by what someone else wrote or said to her. That's all you have to do. Back then, and same thing today, it's all you have to do. You put that idea in people's minds and their thinking, and they'll surely find some part of the spirit of prophecy to apply it to. And they'll find something that they don't like, and they'll say, oh, well, that's probably, yeah, that probably didn't come from God. Of course, Dr. Kellogg wanted it to apply to the whole thing about Battle Creek and the sanitarium being off track. If he could get that out of the way, the cheap labor tap would flow again. Writing to W.C. White, this is Ellen White's son, shortly after getting home from a trip to Europe, the General Conference president, A.G. Daniels, told how one of the leading brethren in Ireland had heard from Dr. Kellogg that, quotes, testimonies were sent out with Sister White's stamp upon them, which she herself never saw. And that the doctor had once forced a confession from Willie that he and her assistants had made up a testimony and signed her name and sent it to Dr. Kellogg. Well, those are both lies. Okay. Those are both lies. Ellen White asserts that they are both lies. So, I'm going to accept her version. Elder Daniels continued writing about this. He said, I find that the air is full of doubts and questionings regarding the spirit of prophecy. I believe that it is our duty to rise up and meet this evil thing and give our people that which will undeceive them and give them assurance. I am persuaded that the war that is to be waged against the spirit of prophecy is to come from within and not outside of our own denomination. I would think that's probably still true. Now, I know where this evil work originates. In every instance, almost, I have been able to trace it to one place, and that one place would be the sanitarium or Dr. Kellogg in person, I suppose. Letters and statements are continually going out, calculated to arouse suspicion and bring unbelief and rejection of the spirit of prophecy. This work is going on all the time and is reaching out to the ends of the earth. Daniels wanted something done, had wanted it for months. But Ellen White urged discretion in dealing with the doctor. She did more than that, of course, and she wasn't blind to what was going on. In fact, she was keeping a close eye on many details of the devil's effort. But when the Battle Creek schools issue started heating up again in the fall of 1905, Elder Daniels was getting desperate. He writes, I have good reason to believe that these Battle Creek schools are designed for a great dragnet with which to catch our young people. The thing is already beginning to work, and unless something decided is done to counteract the movement, we shall lose hundreds of the very flower of our young people. I believe that our whole denomination must be more clearly and fully informed of this dangerous movement at Battle Creek. The Lord has given you, writing to Ellen White, volumes of instruction. What has come to me has informed and aroused me regarding the crisis we are in. I feel sure that if our brethren and sisters knew the facts one half as fully as they have been revealed to you, they would stand as one man against this evil thing. But as it is at present, thousands know but little about it. We say nothing or speak with whispered breath, and all the while the enemy is at work gaining sympathy, influence, and souls. Does this sound familiar? Does this sound at all? This is exactly what happened in heaven. I confess to you, this is Daniel still writing, telling White, I confess to you that this is the greatest sorrow of my life. I have no desire to make war on Dr. Kellogg. I do not care what fame he gets, nor how many worldly people go to Battle Creek, but it breaks my heart to see our young people go there, to be poisoned against the ministry that brought their parents into the truth, and against the message for which their parents have stood and sacrificed so loyally. No one need say that they are not thus influenced. I know better. When a father tells me that his son has become an infidel at Battle Creek and declines to recommend him to his conference for an honorable medical position, I know there is more than imagination on my part regarding the character of the influence there. I seriously fear that for some months we have been losing ground in this controversy. While we have been silent, they have been aggressive. Their efforts have not been open and frank. They are moving under cover and they are gaining ground. They press their warfare untiringly in all directions. Everywhere we go, we run into it. Now and then, someone sends us letters or copies of letters sent out from Battle Creek, which are absolutely untrue and altogether deceiving and undermining in their character. And from all sources, we learn of our young people going there. These things force the issue upon us. The spirit of prophecy has warned our young people not to go to Battle Creek. Dr. Kellogg is determined that they shall go there, and they are going. For one, I feel that the denomination ought to rise up in the name of God and stop this thing. Okay, well, this is the General Conference president. He feels very strongly about this, obviously. We might say he's tearing his hair out. He was very, very concerned. This is just one of many letters that I could quote from describing his anguish during this period of September, October, November, early December of 1905. To Elder Daniel's letter, that specific letter that I just read, Ellen White responded, I have light from the Lord that at this time we must act with great caution. For the enemy is watching our every movement. At times, I have been ready to take steps that would be called aggressive. I would read over the letters containing the warning and caution that I have had from the Lord for several in Battle Creek. At times, I have felt that I must print all the warnings given me for Dr. Kellogg. But I have not yet done this because I have been impressed to wait. If I should make a strong move in this direction, the battle would be on. Those who are opposing the light God has given would feel that they had been attacked, and they would claim that they were compelled to make moves that otherwise they would not have made. And it would take much of our time to meet the issue. Do you see the parallels to Lucifer? Do you see Ellen White now as God's spokesperson on earth? She could not unmask Kellogg, the same as God could not unmask Lucifer in heaven, and Jesus could not unmask Judas during his lifetime. The parallels are amazing. Let us hold on patiently for a little while and let the elements break forth that are struggling into life. Let not too many articles be published in the Review and Herald that are of a character to stir up strife. Oh, that must have just driven them crazy. What can we say in the review? Can we talk about Kellogg? Can we talk about pantheism? Can we talk about this bad idea of having a school in Battle Creek? What can we talk about? How many times can we talk about it? How many times will it stir up strife? They must have been just beside themselves. And so Daniel's response, it's obvious, right? Oh, what kind of a war is this? The enemy is killing us. Our church members don't even know what's going on. And we're supposed to wait. Now, these are not his words. These are my words, right? Daniel's never wrote this. Welcome to the polemos. I think I mentioned this. I don't know. Maybe I didn't. The war in heaven in Revelation 12 the Greek word is polemos, and it means a war of ideas. It's not a war of missiles and tanks and machine guns. It's a war of ideas. So welcome to the polemos. There's a reason for reading Patriarchs and Prophets and Great Controversy. Ellen White had told them to read those books and understand the war in heaven, and they would be benefited in understanding what they had to do in the war on earth, right? There was good reason for waiting. Ellen White wrote, some who have been deceived by men in responsible places, that would be Kellogg, right? Some who've been deceived will repent and be converted. And in all our dealings with them, we must remember that none of those who are in the depths of Satan's snare know that they are there. That's an important principle. We need to remember that. As Ellen White worked so hard to try and save Dr. Kellogg, we need to have some of that spirit in our relation to our brethren when they occasionally do really stupid and unrighteous things. We need to value their souls and try to save them. Later, after these events all played out, she would describe this time period. Long ago, some thought that the time had come when we must take decided action to break the spell with Dr. Kellogg. But in the visions of the night, I was in an assembly of the physicians, and I saw the work that was being planned. Then I said to my son, I must get everything in readiness. for soon we shall see the necessity of having the armor on, ready for action. In that meeting, many things were said, which I can and must meet. I must now work. And we did work. We had to move, and yet we had to wait until those in error thought they could carry things against the ministers and the churches. I was shown their course of action and had everything in readiness for such a movement and labored to defeat their deep laid plot. I want you to note this here. She says this was a deep laid plot. This is not someone making an innocent mistake. This is someone with an intention to harm God's church. A deep laid plot. Going on. Events of late December 1905 constitute the tipping point of Dr. Kellogg's opposition to Ellen White. The General Conference and God's work in general, opposition to Ellen White, the General Conference and God's work in general. It was then that the credibility of the rebellion was, if not completely, at least irrecoverably broken. Oddly, this story is almost unknown. It certainly deserves as much interest as the iceberg vision of 1903, and I would say arguably more. I had never heard this story in all my reading of Adventist history. I had never heard this story until I read it from Elder Daniel's personal letters. It's the first time I've ever heard this story. It's a great story. It's amazing how this hasn't been told and retold. I don't have any idea. W.C. White sets the scene for us in a letter that he wrote to Elder Irwin of General Conference. Gentlemen, he said, Elder Daniels tells me of a telegram from Mother asking him to wait in Battle Creek until manuscripts arrived, which were mailed December 21st. So Elder Daniels was, I think, in Chicago at the time, and Willie White was somewhere else traveling. And on the 21st of December, Ellen White sent a telegram to Elder Daniels and said, please go to Battle Creek and wait for manuscripts. They're going in the mail today. Okay, so now let's switch over to Elder Daniel's own account of this. He wrote this account just, I think, a day after or 2 days after the event. Yesterday morning. Okay, so let's get this straight here. This was December 26th, this yesterday morning. So he's writing this on the 27th. Okay, so yesterday morning, I came early to the Dime Tabernacle office to see if the communication had arrived from Sister White, these manuscripts he was waiting for. I was disappointed that it had not come. A few minutes later, one of the doctors from the sanitarium called to see me. This wasn't Kellogg, but one of the other doctors. He said that he was in great perplexity of mind. He had been brought up from a child to look upon every message from Sister White as having emanated from the Lord. He said that now he was so bewildered and confused by all he had heard that he hardly knew what to think, nor what course to pursue. He stated that the night before, this would have been Christmas night, actually, December 25, the night before, he, with a large company of men, including Judge Arthur, Professor Nicola, Dr. C.C. Nicola, Dr. Rand, Highland Butler, and many of the heads of the departments in the sanitarium, had sat from 5 o'clock until 11 o'clock listening to Dr. Kellogg outline the recent controversy from his standpoint. He said that the doctor assured them that he believed in the spirit of prophecy, and he believed that Sister White is a good woman and that she had been inspired of the Lord. Dr. Kellogg, I believe all that. But he went on then to establish by many infallible proofs the fact that all of the communications which were sent out could not be relied upon as coming from the Lord. Some were from God and some weren't. Now, said this doctor, I want, if possible, that you shall make it plain to me what messages we are to understand are from the Lord, and which ones emanate from men who are influencing Sister White. In other words, tell me how to know the difference between the testimonies that the Lord sends and those which are prompted by reports sent to Sister White. While we were talking, that's still Elder Daniel's account, while we were talking, someone came to the door and handed me the large envelope containing the testimonies I had been looking for. This doctor saw me receive this bundle of testimonies. When he asked me to tell him how to decide which testimonies were genuine and which were spurious, I told him that I was unable to give him any light whatever on this point. I told him that to me, they were all genuine, and I knew of no means by which he could distinguish the true from the false. That to me, they were either all from the Lord or from the devil. Then I called his attention to this envelope containing the testimonies that had been handed in while we were talking. Now, said I, Doctor, we will open this envelope, and you shall be the first to look upon these testimonies. Take them, look them over, and tell me whether they are genuine or spurious, whether they were given to her by the Lord or by some man. He took them and looked at the titles, the dates, and the signatures, and handing them over, said to me, well, I cannot tell you whether these are from the Lord or from man, whether they are reliable or unreliable. It looks to me, said he, that it is a question of faith on my part as to whether Sister White is a servant of God or a wicked pretender. Do you remember with the angels in heaven? Would they trust God or would they trust Lucifer? God had never been anything but trustworthy. Why would they not trust God? This brother is now coming up to the same question. Can I trust Ellen White? Is she God's messenger or not? Well, said I, you are just as able to tell me who inspired these communications as I am to tell you. You have seen them first. You know just as much about them as I do. I cannot give you the slightest information that you do not possess. Now, said I, the only ground for me to occupy is absolute confidence that God is revealing to his servant that which the church needs to understand, and that every single communication which he sends out emanates from God and not from man. So this was not Dr. Kellogg, of course, but one of the doctors from the sanitarium. So with a positive result like that, to start off the campaign, Elder Daniels prepared for the main battle, the reading of the testimonies in the Dime Tabernacle that evening. His account in his letter continues. The people had heard that the communications were coming from Sister White, and they were all anxious to hear them. At 7:30, the tabernacle was filled. The auditorium, the vestries, and the gallery. That would be about 4,500 people, I think. I did not see Dr. Kellogg, but I saw W.K. Kellogg, Dr. Paulson, Elder Jones, Elder Taylor, and other leading men. We first had a very earnest season of prayer. Then I read the telegram that I had received from Sister White and proceeded to read the communications. I read both of them without a comment. The people listened with breathless interest, and the power and authority of the living God accompanied the message. There was a deep hush and a solemn silence that I have seldom witnessed in a congregation. It seemed to me, as I read, that I never felt the burning power of words reaching my own soul as these. When I had finished, it was 9 o'clock, but I told the congregation that it was my impression that we ought to pray, that we ought to resort to earnest prayer, and invited those who felt the same way to retire to the north vestry where we could engage in prayer together. But such a great crowd remained that we changed from the vestry to the auditorium. I think the auditorium must have been 2/3 full. I think that would be about 2,000 people. We did not spend time to talk, but got down on our knees at once and united in earnest prayer to God. We prayed that our eyes might be opened, that we might see things as God sees them. We prayed that Dr. Kellogg and his associates and all the helpers might be led to receive and obey the solemn messages that had come to us. The Spirit of the Lord was present. At 10 o'clock, we closed the service and quietly retired. I should have said that when the general meeting closed, 3 men who had been in the meeting with Dr. Kellogg the night before, from 5 to 11 o'clock, came forward and told me that the meeting held the previous night had been clearly described by the testimony I had read, entitled "The Result of a Failure to Heed God's Warnings." And they said if there had been a doubt in their minds regarding the source of the testimonies, it would have been swept away by their own statements in the testimonies. In other words, Ellen White had written out things that they had said the night before, and they recognized their own thoughts and their own words in this testimony. I have talked with a number who were in the meeting, and I can but believe that Sister White was stirred up by the Lord on the very day that she caused this message to be written and posted to us for the purpose of getting it into our hands on the very day that it arrived. It is profoundly impressive to look at the facts. The message was written in her diary, January 1, 1904, almost 2 years ago. Thursday morning, December 21, 1905, she was roused to have that message copied from her diary and posted to Battle Creek. The work was done and the telegram sent at 11 o'clock that night. Monday night, December 25, a private meeting was held with the leading men in a room in the college. This meeting was of such a nature that a number have told me that if they had not been well grounded, they would have been turned away entirely from the testimonies. One said that he would be driven into infidelity if he believed the things Dr. Kellogg related to them. Early the next morning, December 26, after this meeting was held, the message was in our hands. And in 24 hours after these misleading, bewildering, confusing representations were made to a few men privately, they were openly exposed to nearly 2,000 people. I think he's, one way or the other, he's off on his estimates, but that's okay, we'll go with 2,000. Men may say what they like. I believe that we have a living God, the author of such coincidences as these. I am deeply impressed. The authority and power of the Infinite One came to us last night. Victory has been given to this cause, and it will be worked out now in the Lord's own way. I believe that the fear and restraint that is upon many has been broken, and that now they will stand calmly and fearlessly without wavering in defense of the truth of God. I wish you were here to see and feel what we are seeing and experiencing. I am amply repaid for all the anxiety and perplexity through which I have passed during these fierce struggles. I know that God is rewarding us for our pledge of unswerving loyalty to the spirit of prophecy, as well as all the rest of this message. I shall now work harder than ever to enlighten minds regarding the false reports that have been poured into their ears for the purpose of destroying the authority of the testimonies of God's Spirit. And that's where we're going to end with that particular story. But I hope the reason for all this is apparent. So let's look at that. Through the lens of past history, the Lord has provided a series of parallel illustrations designed to teach us what's coming in the future. We've looked at Lucifer's rebellion in heaven. And then we jump down 4,000 years to Christ's response. We saw Lucifer's accusations, and we saw how Jesus responded to those accusations. Then we dropped another 1,800 years to look at the good Kellogg, in which Kellogg, more than others, grasped the method of ministry that Christ used in his incarnation, and it led to the beginning of the loud cry. Unfortunately, Dr. Kellogg didn't remain steadfast. And so today we've looked at the bad Kellogg and the alpha of apostasy and the warnings that story contains. So Kellogg is so fascinating because he first was probably in some ways the preeminent representative of Christ. And then he became the preeminent representative of Lucifer. So sad. And yet, having gone through this history, two things remain. The alpha of apostasy was to foreshadow the omega of apostasy, and clearly the beginning of the loud cry has to be fulfilled eventually with the final refutation of Lucifer's arguments. And so that's the whole point of this. Those last two items at the bottom of the page there, that's what we'll look at in our final meeting. I hope this makes sense. I hope you will be challenged to see the nature of the contest that we're involved in, the nature of the controversy. And I hope you will commit yourselves to having more of that keen tact and fine thinking and judgment. I forget how it's worded, that God's calling for to refute Lucifer's accusations. Thank you so much. God bless.